Welcome back to We Still Like Each Other, the podcast. I'm Travis.
And I'm Stephanie.
And this is the podcast where we show that the honeymoon stage can last forever.
And ever and ever. And if you are watching, you can tell that we have a very special guest with us.
Very, very special.
We have Chiara Luna, and she's going to tell us a little bit about herself.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure being here with you guys.
Thank you.
Of course. Thank you for coming.
Of course. So my name is Chiara Luna. I am a licensed mental health therapist in New York State. I have been in the field of mental health for about 10 years now, and I specialize in working with couples.
So, Travis and I think we know what we're talking about.
But she really knows.
She actually knows what she's talking about.
I actually called her here because, she can mediate between us.
Yeah, so our conversations have been intense lately. No, I'm kidding. But thank you for joining us. How did you find our page?
So I found you through another person that I follow on, on Instagram. We follow each other, and she shared one of your episodes.
Okay.
And I was like, oh, let me look him up. And then and then I really loved the flow, how real you guys are, how much, how relatable you are.
Yeah.
And we need so much more of this.
Are we ever cringeworthy as a therapist? Are you ever ooh, they are not handling
I wouldn't
that
tell them to say it like that.
No, I would say that I actually enjoy watching you both because I think that you both have this chemistry.
Okay.
And this flow of conversations, even the one that you gave him an attitude on, I loved how he managed it. I love how you were able to kind of okay, all right, I'll take it.
I needed somebody we balance each other out for sure. What I was going to ask you. So I remember when I saw your page and I read your bio and I watched some of your reels and you're from the Bronx. I was like, oh, I'm hyped. This is perfect. And I love that about social media, how it brings you closer to your people.
Yeah.
Even if you don't really know each other.
Because how would we have ever met?
Exactly. Right. And it's perfect. And it's we have this relationship podcast now. And a lot of our listeners sometimes ask us questions that we aren't prepared to answer. So I think today we're going to be able to do that.
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. So before we get into the first topic, I want to know, and probably our listeners want to know, what is your relationship status?
Mm-hmm. So I am married.
Okay.
And
ooh,
yours?
Okay. So I only made that because I couldn't imagine being in a relationship with a couples therapist. How is that? Were you together before you became a therapist? And how does that impact your balance?
Yeah.
Your discussions.
Right. Really good question. So, we've been together for 12 years.
Okay.
Well, we're going to hit 12 years now in January.
Okay.
And so we basically have grown up together.
Okay.
And, couples therapy plays a role in the relationship. Yes, right? Mm-hmm. And I feel it's more positive than negative.
Okay.
Right? Because it's a lot also teaching and learning, but also learning more about myself and about the things that I kind of didn't see before. Now being able to do the work is kind of oh, okay. It's also learning from my couples and my couples learning from me. I always see everything as a shared power.
Gotcha.
Right? So in my sessions with couples, sometimes I'm able to something comes up for me and I'm oh, wow. Now that I see this here and I'm talking about it, I can see how I also kind of can show that.
Yeah. Right? I feel as an educator, the same thing happens. I learn from my students just as much as they learn from me. So I totally get that. Yeah. How does he feel?
For him, I would say that, well, I look, I cannot talk for him, but I would say, that it could be frustrating sometimes.
Okay.
Yeah, because it could be who am I speaking to, the therapist or my wife?
Does he ever feel you're diagnosing him?
No, I don't think the diagnosing part, but I think that the piece of who am I speaking to can come in. But then we it's me, babe. It's your wife,
I would personally feel I could never win, and because I know the goal isn't to win.
Right.
Am I right?
Yeah.
But I would also feel you would never see it my way because of your thought process.
You feel like that anyway.
Yeah, but you're not a professional. At least she has an excuse.
I just think I'm right.
That's a good one. Not because one of the things that I do try my best on is making you feel understood.
Okay.
Right? I can see where you're coming from. Even though I might not agree with you, I can see where you're coming from. And that's one of the pieces that I also work on with my couples on is, hey, like, you don't have to agree, but you can agree to understand her perspective.
Gotcha.
You know?
Definitely. All right. Do you have children?
Yes.
Okay. So you want to tell us about them?
Yeah, of course. So I have 2 boys.
Okay.
One of them is 11 years old, and the second one is 6 years old.
You don't look like you have an 11-year-old girl.
I know.
You're like a baby.
Yeah. I know. I always get that. But yes, I have a whole 11-year-old.
Do you have any experience with like family therapy or children's therapy?
Yeah.
Okay.
So initially when I began I began working for a substance abuse program, but then I started working for a children mobile crisis team.
Okay.
And it was working with children, right? Making sure that they were, behavior issues, addressing them, working together with the school system to create behavior plans at home and at school. So I do have a lot of experience in working with children, as well as working for a prevention program, which is, funded by ACS.
Okay.
So for that program, I was a supervisor and an assistant director. And there I did a lot of work also with families. So, we can go into that.
I know that ACS in different states is called something else. So you want to just clarify like what that means?
Yeah. So for us, it's now actually CPS. So it's Child Protective Services.
Okay.
And those are the people that we contact whenever we feel that, there is some abuse going on in the home.
Got it. Because I know we have listeners that sometimes have to Google places we're talking about. And I'm like, I got to remember, like, we're
Not
international.
Yeah.
Let me stop. So now I know that you're kind of shifting from, you're going to use your license to work for yourself and become an entrepreneur.
Right.
Do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, okay. Sure. So right now I am working in private practice, but I'm working for someone else. And even though I'm an independent contractor, I'm still working for someone. So at this time, I am going to be transitioning into my own private practice, which is called New You Psychotherapy. New as on I knew you.
Yeah.
And so I'm going to begin that in January. I've already done the whole process, and I'm so happy about that and excited.
So y'all got to follow her on Instagram and, stay tuned for updates on that, because I feel like so many people in our community, and by our community, I mean our listeners, will probably want to know where to find you after this.
Do you feel like COVID is what, ignited that flame to want to start this?
Yeah, absolutely. I always knew that I wanted to do private practice, right? But, the everyday life, kids, husband, working full time, it's so much. So when everything slowed down for me, and I was like, oh, wait a minute, this is the perfect time for me to actually get this going. So that's when I started doing telehealth.
So many people had that like light lit under their ass when they had a chance to breathe during COVID. So it's like the silver lining in all of this.
Yeah.
All right. So since we talked about, your husband a little bit, your kids a little bit, I want to go into our first topic, which was initially supposed to be the second topic, but we'll switch it up. Okay. So in episode 6, Travis and I, we have an episode called I'm a Product of a Broken Home. Yeah. And we discuss how our childhood and our upbringing influenced our ideas around marriage, money, and sex, right? And I saw that you have a signature presentation that's called Fulfilling Your Inner Child in Intimate Relationships. So I'm like, that's perfect. And we have a couple of questions from some listeners that we're not prepared to answer. All right. So my first question is, how can our unmet needs as children impact our intimate relationships as adults?
That's a really good one. So I always start by giving an explanation about something that we can all relate to, right? And for example, boys growing up, if they were to cry, we would say to them, don't cry, you're a man, man up. What are you doing, right? And then this boy grows up to think and believe that, oh, wait a minute, I'm not supposed to cry. I'm not supposed to have any type of negative emotions. Yeah. So then what he does is he starts suppressing that, emotion. Now he knows that in order for me to be loved by my parent, because remember, now you're feeling rejected by your parents. So in order for me to be loved, I always have to present in a certain way, right? So that certain way, sometimes you choose that, right? Everybody's different. So a lot of people might say, I'm going to suppress it, right? By just not doing it, not expressing anything, or I'm going to go and journal. I'm going to write because maybe I learned that makes me feel good.
Okay.
Right. So when you grow up and then you go into your relationships, then you are with your partner and you feel distant. You feel like you're not emotionally connected. You feel like you cannot speak to your partner about how you're actually feeling about situations, because every time you try, he or she is like, what are you talking about? Like, that's not a thing. You know what I mean? And then you feel that they either meet you with anger because they don't know that, right? They don't know that this is supposed to happen. We're supposed to talk about negative feelings. Yeah. So they avoid speaking about negative things and negative feelings.
Then you could take it personally.
And you take it very personally.
Do you think the reverse can happen? Because I know growing up, I would say I was pretty emotional. Everyone knew that. I'd cry easily. But as I got older, you start to hear those men, man up. So I started to maybe suppress that a little more. And so it was, as a child, I was letting it out. But then as I got older, then it's like, all right, you don't cry, you don't.
Yeah.
So it wasn't really your family. It was like society.
It was society.
Yeah.
Yeah. That can also happen. Yeah. Everyone has so many different experiences with these things. Like, I can share with me when I was growing up, my coping mechanism was writing. And the reason why I started writing was because my sister one day gave me a diary, right? Like, oh, here, you can write your thoughts here. And I was like, and so every time I try to speak to somebody about something, or my mom or dad, whatever, and I didn't feel heard or understood, right? I would go and just write how angry I was, right? But what that resulted in for me personally, was stonewalling. So now whenever I was in conflict, I would you're talking to a wall.
Because you only let your thoughts out on the paper.
Yep.
Oh. Yep. See, growing up, I was always afraid of a diary because I didn't trust people. I was like, they're going to find it and read it.
I think I've tried to journal, but I felt like I was telling half truths. I wasn't laying it all out there. Oh. I definitely wasn't one of those. I've tried and she did say hi back to me.
But it was kind of fictional.
Exactly. I was writing stories.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's one way, right? Okay. Another way that it can show up is by you growing up in a home where you think that conflict doesn't happen. So when your parents try to protect you from seeing them fight, right? Now you come into a relationship where you might find yourself in conflict with your partner, and you might say, but this is not normal. Like, why are we arguing? I never seen this in my parents, right? Like, within my parents, they never argued about these type of things. Well, they did. They just didn't show you, they hid it, right? And that is such a, we think, right? Like, as parents, because we do the best we can for our kids, we think that because by not exposing them, we're helping them, right? And what we are actually doing is not teaching them that conflict is healthy and can be healthy.
So where do you draw the line? Because you're not, if you and your husband are in a scream fest, obviously you don't want the kids watching. This is healthy, watch.
Right. Right. So there's a balance, right? And I think that the conflict is more about, we can have a discussion and be in disagreement and still be able to have a resolution from this conversation.
And it could be healthy exchange, exactly. Without disrespecting each other.
Right. Right.
And I know, so coming from where we come from, and some of us experiencing, maybe more extreme forms of disagreement at home, or even in how we were raised and disciplined, and we're like that generation that's trying to change that. Mm-hmm. And I feel like I sometimes battle with that. Like, am I being too soft? Because I'm just trying so hard to break these generational traumas that now I'm going to coddle my kid.
One of the things that I do is check in with my child. Like, if you witness, and both of us, right? Like, if you witness us having a disagreement, I'm going to have a conversation with you. And we're going to talk about, hey, how did that make you feel? And we're going to talk about, what did you witness, right? Because it's also that is their perspective on it, not just what we think they know.
I think that's the difference between our generation and last. Our generation cares about what the kids are thinking, where we've discussed even going to sit down and have conversations with Eli after maybe yelling at him for something. Whereas I was like, you go deal with those emotions yourself.
Yeah. I struggle with being real, but also knowing that my way of coping with things probably isn't the best. So like trying to, in the moment, I'm working with my own self and how I'm going to react. Yeah. And I remember the other day, I was like annoyed with you with something. I can't even remember. But we didn't even have a discussion, but he noticed in my body language. He goes, "Are you upset with daddy?" And I don't think I said anything. It was just my mannerisms.
Your aura.
Right? My aura. And it's true. And then I didn't go back and then talk to him about it, but I guess that's something I'll start doing.
Yeah, and mostly if he's noticing it.
Yeah.
He's a smart kid.
He is.
He's paying attention.
And one of the episodes we discussed that Eli has at one time said, "Are you okay, mommy?" And I appreciate that because if I was in constant turmoil, he wouldn't care. He wouldn't notice.
Exactly.
But since it's so few and far between, he's checking in with me when he does notice it. And, finding ways to be honest with him about my feelings so that he can eventually learn how to cope with his own is big.
Not only that you're teaching him that it's okay to feel these things. Right? And that it's okay to open up about them. And that's helpful,
Yeah. A lot of even now, if he's dealing with something emotionally, but I don't really like how he's expressing it, I'm very like, it's okay that you're feeling this way, but I don't like how you're reacting in the situation. So we just have to pick a different way to express those feelings. And I'm like training myself in the moment and then going back to Travis, like, did I handle this correctly?
Yeah, it's so hard.
It's hard.
Yeah. Raising children is hard.
Yeah.
And raising our inner child at the same time is hard.
At the same time, it's like double. And then Travis, you're like my other son. No, I'm kidding.
I was going to say, you're being the parent you wish you had.
Yeah. Ooh, that's deep.
Look at him.
All right. So I have a question. So a listener asked us for advice on generational trauma, specifically tied to culture. So then I started to think like, what is the difference between just generational trauma and then ones that are specific to culture?
Right. So let's talk about that. So generational trauma, those are more about things that are repeated, right? Generation after generation. So there can be alcohol abuse, that could be drug abuse, right? Okay. That repeats all the time, right? It could be sexual abuse in the family. It could be physical abuse, right? Or even corporal punishment and how we discipline our children, right? There can be financial abuse. So there can be a lot of things within one culture, right? Because the one culture is the one that you create within your family dynamic.
Okay.
Right? So like, let's say you are creating a new culture within your own family right now with Eli, with the baby to come, right? And let's say that now, for example, that in order that your children witness you coping with alcohol, right? So every time you guys fight, he notices that you go and drink, right? So now, first of all, that's an issue, right? Because that's not healthy. Yeah. And then second of all, now he's witnessing that. So he thinks, oh, this is the right way for me. This is the way that I'm supposed to be coping is by drinking. So now it becomes a generational thing if he starts doing it. And then his children starts doing it too. And, and it becomes a chain. And so someone, right? It takes only one person to say, this is not okay. This is actually something really, really unhealthy. How can I change that?
Gotcha.
So that's generational.
Okay. So then when we talk about, I guess the cultural thing will be, I have one set of culture that I was brought up with, and Travis has a different one. Yep. So now there's conflict when we're trying to create our own culture within our family. Yes. What's an example of that happening?
The cultural one. So those are like the, let's say, emotional abuse, and because that's one that we typically, at least in our culture, it happens a lot and we don't recognize it, right? Because I mean, a lot of the couples that come see me, they say, I had everything in my house. I had a roof over my head. They fed me. They took care of me. They sent me to school. I have a good education. And I'm like, okay, that's great. And I was like, how about emotionally? Who was there for you? Well, no one no one really asked me how I was doing or how I'm, okay, well, that's within your culture. That's what happened. And now you are doing the same in your relationship. Does that make sense?
Definitely. And I can relate.
It kind of reminds me, we were watching The Bachelorette, and there's a guy on there who's never had a conversation about like any partner, or he's never told his stepfather he loves him, and he's a grown man now. And Eli and I tell each other we love each other every day.
Multiple times a day.
To the point where I'm like, okay. Sometimes I don't even say I love you too. I say thank you. Like, this is a lot. But yeah, we gotta break that, because you don't want grown people or grown men to not know how to handle these emotions.
Yeah. And I always say that, like, I'm the same. Like, my mom did what she could, and we always had food. I was always taken care of. I had my school supplies. I went to school with clean clothes. But there were times where I felt like all of those things were out of obligation, but like the love was missing. Like, I always felt like I was her, like she had to, like an obligation versus like a relationship.
Right.
Legally.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point. And that's something, and also paying attention to how that impacted us growing up, because then that means that, if that's the relationship, like it's an obligation, how do I feel about myself now as an adult, right?
Yeah.
Like, how does that play a role? Do I feel like I do certain things in life because I have to do it because it's an obligation and I'm doing it just because? Or am I doing it because I know it's good for me?
Yeah. Oh, that's deep.
That fucked me up.
Definitely. And also, you know how he said sometimes we feel a little overwhelmed by how much love Eli shows us. And I don't know where to draw the line and how to, ask him to, like, set boundaries with him. Because of feeling like I was loved out of obligation, I shower him with so much love. But could that be too much? Could that become problematic if he's too loving?
So a lot of things could happen, right? Because, and this is what I say, is that we always, like, we do the best we can with our kids with the best knowledge that we can. And it's also recognizing that even though we have all this knowledge and we are doing the best we can, is that our kids are still going to grow up with some trauma. Right? Yeah. Like, there's just going to be something that they're just going to be
You never gave me cookies when I asked for it.
Right.
And like, now I eat cookies all the time.
Yes. Yes, there's going to be something. Right? I love love. So when you talk to me about like, can me showing him so much love be a bad thing? Sometimes, right, we grow up to expect that then in our relationships from our partners, all that love. And if we don't get all of that love, then it's not good enough. Right. So again, it is showing that balance.
Yeah. Right. I noticed that in his friendships. Like, sometimes he'll say like, they don't want to play with me. And I have to remind him, like, they don't have to play with you every single time you want to. Like, it's their choice at the end of the day. You can ask, but just because they say no, it doesn't mean they don't like you or that you did something wrong. They just need space, which he struggles with. Space. Showing
boundaries. Yes. And boundaries through actions, right? Because a lot of us, we can talk a lot. We can say, yeah, this is what you're supposed to do. But if they don't see that in us, then how can they repeat it, right? So you can start by placing those boundaries within yourselves here, right? Like, even when you're noticing that you need space, verbalizing that to him. Yeah. Like, Eli, today I need some space, baby. Yeah. I love you so much.
Mommy time.
Yeah.
Or even just now when you she was combing out his hair.
I was about to say that.
Yeah, I overheard it, but you can say that.
So I was brushing his hair, and he's very talkative. So he kept like, he likes to play games. Like, he'll play I Spy, or I'm going to make a beat. Can you rate it? Like, just whatever. And I said, honestly, Eli, I just want to listen to this music while I brush your hair. I don't really want to talk about anything. So he was like, okay.
Yeah.
And didn't he talk like right after?
Yeah, like 30 seconds later, he said, can I talk now? I said, not yet, Eli.
Yeah.
Not yet.
Yeah, I get those same experiences with my boys. The 11-year-old, because he talks a lot. But
okay. So I have one more listener. It was kind of very similar. She said, how do you handle cultural differences in a marriage? specifically when it comes to raising children, which I feel like we kind of discussed. Have you seen cultural differences manifest themselves in child rearing disagreements? And what are some strategies families can use to overcome them? So if like Travis and I disagree on some form of discipline or whatever.
So let's go with the first part of it, which was, what was it again? The first part?
Cultural differences in marriages, specifically when it comes to raising your children.
So I always say start having those conversations before you have children, please. Start having those conversations early on, because you both are going to have different perspectives on a lot of different things, right? It's expecting that we're both coming from different cultures, and you might have gone to private school, you might have gone to public school, and that might be a discussion that should be had. So where do we want to have the child go to school? Like, do I want private? Do I want public? Right? The other one is daycare. A lot of partners feel that it's either they want to stay home with their child for the first year or maybe indefinitely, who knows, right? And the other partner might be, no, I want my child in daycare so he can learn or she can learn to socialize with other kids, to be, to be able to relate with other people.
So do you think if and when you decide to have those conversations, is it worth ending a relationship if you can't come to an agreement?
That's a great question. I think that there has to be a compromise, right? So I always say, in order for me to make something work with you, I need to make sure that we are exploring every solution that we can before we make a decision like that, right? Because we can make things work if we choose to, right?
Absolutely.
Everything is a choice, right? So if you choose that, I love this person so much that I want to make it work, you're going to make it work, right? But if you choose to, you know what, there might be better out there, then you're going to be out there.
I always say that.
Something like that.
Like when I say, people are like, he just won't. I'm like, well, then maybe he's not your person. Because I feel like people who are meant to be and like really love each other find a compromise eventually, even if it takes some time or even if it's not what you initially thought you wanted. But to just be in a constant disagreement about the same thing for so long, I feel like there's what I was saying earlier? Like, you're just not compatible.
Right. No, yeah, absolutely. Because I think that sometimes it's not about giving in or giving up. It's about, again, finding the middle ground. Okay, what can we agree on? So if we want a good school, let's say that I don't want to pay for school. Okay, so maybe that means that we have to move to a location where the public schools are good, right? So it's really negotiating and changing perspectives, because that's the other thing, is that a lot of the cultures that we come from, absolutely, they're different, right? Even though we can be two Dominicans married, trust me, the cultural dynamic within the two households were different. Yeah. So when we come into that relationship and we try to analyze or look for ways on how to make things work, wow, I lost my point.
We're talking about cultural differences, even within the same culture, finding the middle ground. But I totally forgot what I just That's can't. Totally fine. So I'm gonna give you an example of a cultural difference that comes to mind. Okay. When it comes to the holidays, Christmas trees versus no Christmas trees, Santa is real versus I buy you these damn toys. What are some suggestions with handling those kind of differences?
So let's say that now we are in we're in it, you're pregnant. We didn't have this conversation beforehand, right? And a lot of that happens, right? We, things just happen. I think it's important to, because that also kind of plays a role in spirituality and religion, right? So if you are from one religion and I'm from another, how can we compromise to how we want to raise our children, right? And again, a lot of goes back to compromising is how can we discuss this in a way that we both feel heard by each other? And now my point came back, which was
and we're back.
We're back. Which was, you have to remember that within your own culture, your parents decided how that culture was going to look like for you guys, for the children, right? Same for you, right? Now, how do you want your household to look? What do you want your culture dynamic to be like? You
have the power to change that.
You have the power to change that. Just because you have one perspective doesn't mean that that's the healthiest perspective. Yeah. Right? So I typically ask my couples, when your children go to therapy, and let's say they come and they see me, when I ask them, how would you describe your parents' marriage? How do you want them to define that? And they look at each other like, oh, shit, hold on. And I do that because, again, is they get so stuck with the way that they see things and the way that they were brought up, right? And I'm like, yeah, that's wonderful. But you guys have the power and control now to create whatever you want for your own family.
Yeah.
So it's about getting to that. It's kind of changing the perspective about what do we want and how can we make it work together.
Yeah. I have a friend who... there's like that cultural difference with religion and Christmas. And it's like, they're not going to have a Christmas tree ever, but they're going to wear like holiday pajamas and take pictures. So I'm like, that's a compromise. And I love it. When you brought up, how would you want Eli or your kids to describe your marriage? What came to my head that I have concerns with is that whenever he thinks about adulthood, he thinks about marriage and kids. He instead of saying adults, he'll say parents. And then he'll say, when I have a wife so then I sometimes worry, I'm like, adulthood isn't just marriage and kids. Yeah. So I try to correct him, but help. What do I say to him in a way that's, Yeah.
I think it's more because we all develop those things. We either say what we want in life or we say what we don't want in life, right? So if I grow up, I remember a lot of things I've said, I definitely don't want these things, right? Because of what I was experiencing in childhood. But I started speaking about what I wanted, right? I don't think there's anything really wrong with the things that we want in life as long as there's a balance, right? So it's teaching him, okay, so what would your life look like if you didn't have those things when you grow up? Right, so also to give him that different perspective. Because that's the thing, is that our kids grow up with just one perspective, right? And they cannot see anything else. But that's also because as parents, we are not challenging them to think differently. We only are allowing them to think the way that they are thinking now from what they're seeing and experiencing now.
Yeah. So since he's with us all the time, he feels like this narrow view of like life as an adult. Yeah. There's always, when I'm a parent, and I'm like, well, you're going to become an adult. Like, being a parent is specific, and you don't necessarily have to do that right away or ever. Like, it depends.
Yeah.
Oh, man. This is
kids.
Raising kids.
It's ghetto.
So what suggestions do you have? Because I feel like, let's say we're a healthy couple. Even the example I gave, they decided no Christmas tree, but we're doing holiday pajamas. What about now if the extended family is putting in their input?
Yeah, a lot of opinions, unwanted opinions, right?
Yeah.
I have to say there has to be a conversation about that in regards to how involved are we allowing our external family to be in our marriage issues, right? How much of their opinion matters to us, to our relationship, what's going to be beneficial for us.
Why are you making a face over there?
It's hitting home.
And the reason why I say that is because, yeah, you may even choose to, let's say, even diet, it's a thing, right? So let's say you would say, okay, I would not, I don't want to feed my child carbs anymore. Because you know what, I've read into it that shit turns into sugar. It's not good. So I don't want to do that anymore. Now, your mom is used to giving Eli rice every time he goes over there, and candy and junk food and everything. So now she starts looking at you like, are you crazy? Like,
yeah, her mom came over the other night to cook. What was it that she was looking for? And you was like, I don't use that anymore. And she's like, you grew up on that.
Sazon, adobo, and the cubitos.
Yeah, I know.
I was like, I don't use all of that. That's just salt and other seasonings and preservatives. I don't need the preservatives. She goes, you grew up on that, right? I'm like, I have a lot of life to live.
Exactly. So in those instances, right, where you might make a choice, you both might make a choice that works both for you. You have to decide, okay, what about this? Do we actually have to share? And what about this? And some things you have to share. Like, for example, if you decide no junk food for my kid, right? Like, you have to let your mom know. You have to let your parents know. But it's also setting that boundary with your parents. Like, Mom, I really appreciate you. I get what you're saying. And I get that, what you're used to is giving me rice every day, but that's not what's working for us. You know, what we have decided to do is X, Y, and Z. And I really wish that you would respect that moving forward.
Definitely. That comes to play with the candy. But I feel like our family, tries to make me the villain. Because they'll be like, you know, your mother doesn't like you having all that candy.
Yep. Exactly.
And then it makes it look like I'm like this evil person.
And also addressing that with them. It's like, it's not cool that you do that, because then he's looking at me like I'm a bad person.
Yeah.
Right. And I don't want my son to have that perception. And they don't do it because they think that now Eli's gonna think you're a bad person.
Yeah,
right?
but it's just natural.
Yeah, it's a natural thing.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it ain't cool.
Yeah.
Don't do that.
Even when the intent isn't bad, you could still address it and set the boundary. Yeah. All right.
Setting boundaries.
You have anything to say before we move to the next topic?
No, I mean, I'm learning a lot. So,
which part you felt was hitting home?
Just the family input. You know, I deal with that, especially from my family, you know, unwanted opinions. And it's tough finding the balance between, you know, you care a lot about your family and you don't want to dismiss their feelings, but at the same time, it's not wanted. Right. So let me live my life. If I fall, hopefully you'll be there to pick me up. Right. But, you know, I've been coasting for now in a positive sense.
Yeah. Another thing I'll say, right, about childhood and culture, right, is that it's also identifying like what were some of those needs that I had, right, and I didn't get met. So now as an adult, I'm here sitting and I'm thinking about, okay, what were some instances where I felt I needed validation, or where I felt I needed just someone to cheer me up, right, or I just wanted to feel good enough, right, because a lot of the times that plays out during childhood. You may get an 80 on a test, and then you go excited showing your mom or your dad, and they're like, why don't you get a 90? Then you get a 90. Next time it's like, why didn't you get 100? Yo, you go get the 100, and then you come back and they're like, okay, cool.
That's what you're supposed to do.
Right, that's what you're supposed to do. So now you grow up and you have this feeling of needing to be perfect. That's one. And even though, and really being hard on yourself that when you're not perfect, right? And then you also find yourself needing that, with that feeling of not feeling good enough ever. Like it doesn't, people can give you praise, people can give you everything, but you don't feel it. You don't even accept the praise. Like there is a thank you, but yeah, it's not that serious, right? Like my accomplishment, oh yeah, it's what I'm supposed to do. Right. And that plays a lot also in the relationship, because at times when, let's say you want to give him a compliment, but he doesn't feel good enough, he might reject it. And then you might not do it anymore. And now he's feeling not good enough because you no longer are giving him the compliment.
But you didn't accept it. And it's just back and forth.
Yeah. So that's one thing that I'll say. And the other thing that it's very important that I do see a lot, it's people pleasing. How come do I always gotta make others feel better, right? And it's about, well, how did that show up for you as a child? What were some things that you can kind of think about during your childhood with your parents, where you felt like you needed to please your parents or any caretaker? And then they start to think, and they're like, oh wow, yeah, like I remember that because of that. Every time my mom and dad would have an issue, I would go and try to cheer up my mom and do everything I had to do to make her, like, to please her in every way. It could be the opposite. It could be that you know that by pleasing your father or your mother, you were not going to get it. You were not going to get hit, right? By being this pleaser and this perfect child, you were not going to get hit. You were not. So now you grow up to doing the same thing, pleasing everybody else, because now you're afraid of conflict. So those are just a few ones that I wanted.
Do you notice, especially with family, that the opinions and the judgment, they only come once you start to go against the grain?
Oh yeah.
Like once you're outside of the box that they view you in, now it's, oh, you know, Travis is doing this, or why would he do that? Yeah. But if I was staying on the trajectory of where they saw my life going, then, you know, it's all good. Right. But the minute I, you know, rear off to the right.
Yeah. And the right is a good place. Yeah. Grass is greener.
Then now it's opinions, judgments, you know.
It's the underlying beliefs that we all have, right? So we all have this set of underlying beliefs about ourselves, right? Some of us are aware of them. Some of us are not. Some of us are still working to recognize what other wants I may have, right? But people have the tendency, and this is one of the things that I also talk about my couples, is that people have the tendency of blaming all the time. Well, I felt because of you, right? Like, you did this. And it's like, no, well, what? How come you got triggered, right? Like, how come it's bothering you that I'm moving a certain way, right? And other feelings come up with that in family, right? It's like, oh, we didn't do a good job. We didn't do good enough. Like, we fucked up, right? And it's like, no, it's just, it means that you are thinking this way. This is your comfort zone. This is your comfort level. And that no longer fits me, right? And I want to explore. Yeah. But they're uncomfortable with that because they don't know that world.
Or they never saw you in that light.
They never saw you in that light. But what do you mean by that? That they never saw you in that light?
It gets deep. It gets deep. I guess, whatever, fuck it. I've never had so many opinions on my life until I met Stephanie. I was just kind of there living.
My fault.
And, everything that led me here, I know there's just an opinion attached to every moment once I met Stephanie. But before that, just kind of like, that's Travis. He's just doing his thing.
Yeah.
We love him. And I don't doubt that they love me now, but it just feels like a lot more judgment.
Yeah.
Sometimes I sit back and I think is that your family has a lot of strong women, a lot of very opinionated and outspoken women, and I'm the same. So it's like, it might be like a feeling of like, I'm replacing somebody, which I don't think I am. And also, you were very stuck in your ways for so long. And I feel like you've had so much growth since we've been together that people might think like, is this what he wants to do? Or is it Stephanie making him this person that he isn't? You know what I'm saying?
And even if that were the case, even if she were making me this person that I'm not, the person that she's making me, I feel like is a positive person.
Right.
It's not like I'm out here gangbanging because of Stephanie. I'm selling dope. No, I'm working hard. I'm raising a family. Yeah. I'm raising now soon to be 2 sons.
Yeah.
So this should be like, oh, kudos to you.
Right.
You're eating more than chicken tenders.
That's the big one.
Yeah, it is. Because even to this day, my mom will say, he's eating that. And it sounds small, but it's pretty big. But that someone would, or I would allow myself to open up my palate for someone.
Yeah. And it's just because I'd say it all the time. Like, I really do not care what you want to eat. But if we're going to be together for a long time, when we're 60 and 70 and all you ate was fried food, that's going to impact our relationship if you're not healthy because of what you've been eating. So thinking about food, not just as fuel for the moment, but like that's going to take care of your body forever.
Yeah. And something as small as that, right, as the food situation, it's also feeling like, and now I'm being like, empathetic towards the family. Yeah. It's also being like, oh, damn, like he did it for her, never for us. Like, wow, what does that mean?
Yeah.
Right.
That's true.
Oh, you can send us the bill.
All right. So our final topic is very, very important. You have a presentation that's titled "What Goes Unsaid About Domestic Violence." So domestic violence it impacted my family very severely, but then the way we coped with it is like we act like it didn't happen. So when I was 5, my mom's parents passed from murder-suicide. I'm so sorry. And we've never talked about it till this day. So I was 5 years old, so this was 26 years ago. And I knew it happened because I was old enough to remember my mom's reaction. Like, it was a big emotional reaction. So I kind of remember that. Then it's like she left to DR, handled it, and then she came back and like raised us. And I've never ever. So if you think murder-suicide, you would think there's a history of domestic violence in the family before that moment, right? I couldn't tell you if there was or if there wasn't because she just never talks about it. My mom is a super strong woman. Like, she don't play. Like, my dad never raised his voice at her because she'll be like, what? Like,
who are you
talking to? And I'm assuming that's because of whatever she might have witnessed. But we kind of just moved on. Like, things happen. No one's going to save you. This whole idea of like going through your emotions, seeking help. It's like, we got bills to pay. We got to work. So what is it pointless for me at this point, 26 years later, to kind of help my mom discuss that? Or is it just something that, like, she never wanted to talk about it, just move on?
Yeah. I always say, in order for us to move on in life and just be aware even more of who we are today and be true to ourselves, we need to understand our history, right? And perhaps, your mom just never felt safe to be able to open up to anyone about it, right? And also felt like, again, maybe it was a learned behavior that you just don't speak about these things. Like, what's the point? That's not going to bring them back to life, right? Like, this is the perception that a lot of people have, is that what's the point of me speaking through what happened to me or what happened to people that I cared about, right? Like, that's not going to help me. And it's like, no, it's going to help you, right? Because now as you're speaking about it, you're going to start healing. You're going to start recognizing pains that you had, that you've been suppressing for so long.
I'm trying to imagine myself going through something like that, and I feel like I would have PTSD.
Yeah.
And although we know your mom, she's a strong woman, she's going through life. Like, I just spoke to her like about an hour ago. She's great. But there has to be something there that she's not addressing.
Yeah. And there can be a lot of, something that I notice in my culture a lot is like anxiety. It's a lot of anxiety about a lot of things, and they just think it's normal. Like, it's normal for me to feel this way. And I'm like, no, it's not normal. It's not okay. Like, you're not handling well, right? But I love that you brought up the fact of PTSD, right? Because PTSD can look very different for a lot of people. PTSD also plays a role in relationships, and we can talk about that at another episode. But when it comes to your mom, Stephanie, just to go back to that, I think that, if you feel comfortable, right? Like, asking her if she feels comfortable talking about that with you, or just kind of like, Mom, like, I just have some questions about it, and I wonder if you'll be willing to like talk to me about this. I think that's okay.
So when I was in college, I was a psych major. So I thought like, okay, I bought her a journal, and we've never been able to talk. So I was like, maybe she'll feel more comfortable writing. And I asked her some questions about that. I never got a response.
Ooh.
And that was when I was like 19, 20, so over 10 years ago.
Right. Or maybe even asking her, like, what makes it so hard for you to talk about this? Like, I just want to know what makes it really difficult, because I want to understand you. I want to see your perception. Yeah. And she may tell you then, like, how come?
And I feel like a big part of like why I want to know is because of course, like you said, no matter how well you try to raise your kids, they're going to have some trauma. So there's like things I'm like, I wish my mom did X, Y, and Z instead of that. But I want to understand the history that led her to her choices so that I could give her more grace in those things.
Yes, that's important, right? Because we have a good understanding. I always tell my clients, right? Like, validate yourself, validate your feelings, right? Because we're really quick to also say, I'm angry. I was angry. When I grew up, I was angry at my mom for X, Y, and Z. But I get it because da 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 da. And I'm like, no, wait, hold on. Let's stay with the feeling first, right? You have the right to feel angry, because your mom did this thing. We can deal with the empathy later, because of course I want you to have that also, so you can move on. Right. So yes, developing the empathy and understanding for our parents is so important, so we can move on from like feeling so hurt and feeling like, why you did this to me? Like, I have no understanding of it. Right. So developing empathy for their circumstances is absolutely important. And I can see why you would want to have that conversation with your mom.
And I'm like, I'm 30 years old. I want to know. All right. So I know that in your notes you mentioned that there's different types of domestic violence. Could you just give us like a brief rundown of what those different types are?
So the most obvious one, right, is physical abuse, right? And in our culture, that's the one that we kind of determine whether you are in the domestic violence or not. So, and I don't, it just surprises me so much that up to this point, like, you can come and say like, yeah, I had an argument and he did this and that and the third, and be like, did he hit you?
He hit you?
No, he didn't. Okay, so then you're not being abused. So anyway, physical abuse is one of them, right? Which is when your partner is putting hands on you. He's hitting you, pushing you, or she. Right? Whenever any of these things are going on. Then we have also sexual abuse, right? So being forced to have sex when you don't want to have sex, right? Then we have financial abuse, right? So I hear things, I've heard a lot of things, but I hear one of them that I hear is, you're going to work and your paycheck is going to be transferred to my account. And the reason for this is because I manage money better, not to our account, to my account. Okay. I pay bills better.
Words matter.
Yeah. So that's a way of gaining control, right? And we'll talk a little bit more about that. But that's financial abuse. So basically you have even though you work, you have no access to your paycheck, or you are obligated to send the paycheck to your partner. And also part of that is, I'll give you an allowance for what you need. Can you make a list of what you need? Or you know what? Don't even worry about it. If it's food shopping, we can go together. And if you need clothes, I can buy the clothes for you. So, yeah.
I feel like financial abuse, that's kind of new to me. I never really heard that one.
Yeah. And it happens. And I know, like, for example, the fact that now I'm not working like my full-time job. I still do have my tutoring business, but I don't have a job, right? And I feel like a big fear for a lot of women is like, now I'm financially dependent on Travis. And now if something happened, I have nowhere to go. And we had a whole thing about how other people don't want women to be moms, like stay-at-home moms. Yeah. And that was a lot of the feedback we got. Like, oh, so now you're stuck with him. Or what's going to happen if he picks up and leaves you and now you have no money?
Well, you know where to go to get a job.
Exactly. But yeah, that reminded me of what you were saying.
You're right. That comes up a lot. And that's a whole different conversation, because I think it's an abuse in the way that I describe it, right? If it's a mutual decision you guys are making about, listen, I'm going to depend on you for the next couple of months and next couple of years. That's
abuse,
okay, right? The other one is psychological abuse.
Okay.
That one is when I want to instill fear in you. So if you leave me, I'm going to take the kids away. Or if you leave me, I'm going to hurt you. I'm going to actually kill you. Right? So like, I'm instilling fear in you and your heart. So whenever you think about leaving me, you're going to think twice.
Is it also the same? I know when people say like, if you leave me, I'm going to hurt myself.
Oh, yes. That's another one. So making you feel scared for the other person's life. Yeah, absolutely. That's another way.
Okay.
Then we also have emotional abuse. That's the one where I am making you feel less than, right? I'm making you feel like you're not worth it. There's verbal abuse, which is me using degrading language when we are having arguments. So I'm calling you all types of names. Let's see. There's two that we typically don't talk about a lot. And that one is spiritual abuse. So that's the one where I use my religion to manipulate you. Right? So I use how the word of God, right, says this. And because of that, I'm validating myself now about why I'm actually supposed to abuse you.
Because there's higher powers telling me that that's the way.
Exactly.
It's in the book. It's in the book.
That's like the show we were watching, was it Seeking Sister Wife? And it's like about, polygamy. And there was some that it seemed super healthy. Like that's just the lifestyle they want to live. But there were a couple that it seemed like they were using religion. And like to convince the wife, like, this is what we have to do because God wants us to do it.
Right. Look at that. Yeah. And then there's two more. So let's see. Also neglect. A lot of us do not consider neglect as abuse in intimate partner relationships. And neglect means that I am neglecting all my responsibilities within the household, for example. Right? So let's say we both work. But when you both get home, you're the only one cleaning, doing the dishes, doing homework with the kids, taking care of everything. And he comes home and he's just putting his leg up, I
was going to say, a lot of people have been messaging us about video games. And, Travis is a gamer. And they'll be like, oh, I love that my husband plays games because he's not in the streets. But there is a limit, because if you're playing games all the time, which you don't, like, I don't have this issue with Travis at all, thankfully. But I've also heard that, and men will use that, like, well, at least I'm home.
Oh, yeah. No,
I'm not in the streets. I'm not cheating. But if you're at the computer or the video game for 6 hours, that's a form of abuse.
Right.
Neglect.
That is. You're neglecting your relationship. Perhaps we're neglecting your kids, right? You can have hobbies. You can have hobbies, but everything needs to be balanced.
Definitely.
Do you think, so you named a few different types of abuse. Do you feel like any of them are redeemable?
Do you mean by?
So you hear women, or I'll just use women for example, have taken men back who have physically abused them or financially abused them.
Yeah.
Would you be concerned that at any moment he could just, pick up that pattern again?
Yeah. I think that when you have identified that there is any sort of abuse in your relationship, you need to seek help if you want to make it work again, right? Like, you have to seek help in order to change those patterns of behaviors, because if not, it's going to continue to repeat. Remember that the abuser is an abuser because of many reasons, but prior, maybe they were abused as children, or they were abused themselves in a prior relationship, and they learned that, you know what, now I have to be the one in power, right? So there's many different reasons, but I think that if, as the abuser, you identify for yourself that I want to change and I don't like this about myself, and you then talk to your partner and you guys say, okay, we're going to do this, but we have to go to therapy to make it work, then I think that's a nice commitment. Now, redeemable in the sense of we can make this work by ourselves, even though no. I don't know that that has been effective yet.
Yeah. You need that mediator.
You need a third party.
Yeah, definitely. I don't know. I'm like scared. Like, I feel like a lot of those, like the neglect because, the video games, or maybe financial sometimes isn't done with bad intent. Like, they're not realizing what's happening.
That's another good one.
But I feel like when it comes to physical abuse, like, what you're doing, and it's scary. Like, that's one of the ones that, like, for me, it's one and done. Yeah. Like, I could.
No, I agree. Yeah. I think that the physical abuse is one of the most severe ones because one of the most severe ones, but right, because emotional can also be very severe, because that is literally putting your self-esteem to the floor and also causing you not to
health issues.
And not to trust yourself, right, because you are not worth it. So maybe I do deserve this. Maybe I do deserve getting hit because you know what, I did him wrong. Because, and we'll go, we can talk about red flags, but it's making you believe that what I did was because of you. Yeah. And then you start to believe that thing because, again, your self-esteem is on the floor. So, yeah, it makes sense that you hit me. Yeah.
I definitely do want to talk about red flags because you often hear, like, especially when it comes to physical abuse, it doesn't happen right away. Like, it takes time. Yeah. So what are red flags that, like, maybe that's something that could come down the road?
Yeah. So one of the things I do say is that red flags start from the time we're dating, right? And that's one of the things that go unsaid, is that we typically go into, like, when the relationship was already established, right? And part of the work that I do is really kind of rewinding the tape and being like, no, let's identify what were some of the things that you noticed during dating time.
And that you ignored.
Right? And one of the things I do say is that remember that during dating time, you might notice, like, let's say we went out for dinner and pay attention to, like, how he or she is expressing themselves about waiting for their food, right? Are they being impatient? Are they being like, like, oh my God, it's taking so long. Like, what's going on? Like, oh, this is not, right? Like, are they, like, pay attention to those things, right? Yeah. Because that can tell you a lot about a person. I'm not saying that that's going to define everything about them, but that's a piece of it that you can save just for later on, just in case it shows up again differently. Let's say that during this dinner, your date gets drunk. And then you notice that, when this person is drunk, he gets very aggressive. Okay, I don't like that. But you know what? it's fine. It was probably just that one time. And what we do during dating time is literally we fall in love with who we want to create, to believe they are, instead of falling in love with who they truly are.
Like the potential.
Yeah, I'm gonna repeat that again. We fall in love with who we want to believe they are, instead of falling in love with who they truly are, because they're showing us who they are. But we are excusing that.
Yeah.
Right.
Making up scenarios,
saying that it was just a one thing. And if it happens again, we might say, you know, it makes sense. He was with his friends and whatever, right? But also noticing, paying attention to that. How does he behave? How does he treat his parents? How does he have long-term relationships, like friendships, right? How do you notice his friends acting around him or her? Right. So noticing like paying attention to those little things during dating time is important, because they can inform you so much.
Do you think there's any truth to some women want like a fixer-upper?
What do you mean?
Like, oh, you know, he was like this, but now I've turned him into this. It's kind of like
a project,
or, you know, it's an achievement.
I mean, it could happen.
Yeah.
I'm not going to say that, you know, men or just women cannot change. I think that you can realize like, hey, I noticed that when you drink, you cannot stop. And I have a concern about that. Can we talk about that? Now, paying attention to that conversation. What is he or she going to do? Are they going to take accountability and say they're going to change and actually show you that, hey, I'm changing? Like now you guys are going out and you're seeing the change in behavior. Or are they ignoring you, or are they meeting you with defensiveness and anger when you are talking to them about things that you don't like? Right. So yes, people can change if you bring the concerns to their attention. Right. So that's also important. It's communication. It's bringing it to their attention.
And how they react.
Exactly.
And do they acknowledge it, or they make excuses for themselves?
Right. Yep.
So talking about red flags, was a few weeks ago, red flags were trending all over social media. You as a professional, how did you feel with it trending? Because I almost feel like when things become memes, they're kind of downplayed. So it's like, oh, you know, he hit me, red flag, haha.
Right.
But it's serious.
Yeah.
But so now, even though it's kind of on one side is positive, we're talking about red flags, but on the other side it's kind of becoming a meme.
Right.
Even we had meme night the other night, and one of our friends, a couple, they came as red flags. So it's kind of like a ha, but on the other side, you're like, well, it's not a joke.
It's not funny. Yeah. So I think, you know, when it comes to memes, I actually, I don't know, I'm behind. I haven't seen these memes.
Okay.
So I'm going to have to, you know, put myself out there.
So it was more so like there will be like tweets and it'll say like, if she asks for money into her Cash App, red flags.
Oh,
if
I remember. Okay.
Whatever, red flags. And it was just like a bunch of little.
Yeah. I remember now with the flags, right?
Yeah,
yes.
yeah.
So I think that name entertainment, I always say that. So listen, if it takes us creating memes so awareness can be brought up to people, then let's create them. You know, I think that this is also a way of putting the information out there. And now in speaking more specifically about some of the red flags, right, that we should be paying attention to, there is, right, let's start with humiliation. Are you humiliating me in front of people? Are you humiliating me, you know, behind closed doors? And what does that even look like?
Oh, humiliation's bad.
Right? Then pay attention also to the controlled outburst that these abusers have, right? Because don't you like ask yourselves, like, how come when we're outside in front of people, you don't get upset? But the minute we're behind closed doors, you lose your temper. And the reason why I say this is because a lot of abusers come back saying, I'm so sorry, you know, I just couldn't control my anger. You know, I have anger issues and you make me do this thing.
But you controlled it outside.
Right? You controlled it. What happened? Right? So paying attention to that, because a lot of us ignore those things, that they only hit you or they only abuse you in any other way when you both are by yourselves.
Yeah.
Another one is gaslighting.
That's been like big in the last couple of years.
Yeah, that's a big one. And it's basically making you doubt your own reality. Is that, what are you talking about? Are you crazy? That didn't even happen. Like, where were you? Were you actually there? It doesn't seem like you were there. And then you literally start to say,
Am I bugging?
Right. Like, okay. And then you change your narrative, right? Like you start saying like, yeah, maybe it was me. You see, this is why I actually deserve to be in this relationship. Right. So gaslighting is a big one. Controlling behavior, right? So literally controlling you from who you can speak with, which then goes into isolation, right? Controlling where you go, who can be your friends and who cannot. And they do this really smart too. They be like, you know, babe, I really don't like Stephanie. She is, I feel like she's a bad influence.
She's too opinionated.
She is, you know, she just, I don't know. I just don't like it.
Yeah.
And then you like, you start thinking like, damn, like I love my man, you know.
He doesn't like her.
And yeah. So, you know what, I'm going to have to put, you know, some boundaries in my relationship with Stephanie, which leads then to, because he or she is going to continue to name other people that
until you're
isolated, like, until you have nobody. And you're going to notice you have no one when you need someone. And you're there saying like, who can I call right now? Well, you have isolated yourself from everyone else because of him, right? And that's when it hits.
That's why sometimes the physical abuse takes time, because it's like they're prepping you for it.
Yeah, it's the honeymoon stage, you know? It's the honeymoon stage. And then when it comes, it comes hard. Because you never expected that from this person.
And it's at a point where you're probably so dependent on them that it's harder to walk away.
Yeah.
You've been so isolated already that you have no one to turn to.
Yeah. Yeah. And remember that there's like the little things that go in too, because physical abuse typically is not just alone, right? It comes in with the emotional abuse, or it can come, typically it comes in hand with emotional abuse, but also it can be with a financial one, right? So it can be with it, also immigrants, right? That's another big one. There's another big one telling you that, okay, go ahead, leave. I'll call.
So they could deport you. Who deports people?
Yeah.
ICE.
Yeah. I call ICE on you.
Yeah.
You know, and I'll take the kids, right? Because they are American. You're not. Right. So now I'm here stuck, and I feel like I can't do anything, and I have to stay.
And he's abusive to you. You don't want to leave your kids with that person.
Right.
So you'll do anything to stay there.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'll add that a lot of the things that I heard one of your podcasts, you guys were talking a little bit about this, about DV and just how to support those, because it can also be overwhelming for the individual, for the friend, for the family member, right? And one of the things that I always say is ask them how you can support them, because honestly, no one knows better than them on how to stay safe. They have found the best ways to stay safe in that home. And stay there and stay safe with their children.
Okay.
You know, so it's more about, hey, like, what can I do to support you? They might tell you, like, listen, I actually, thank you for asking. I need you to make copies of the birth certificates and leave them in your house. So when I'm ready to leave, I can just go and pick them up and leave. Because another thing is taking all the documents away from them.
And I feel like sometimes if you try to help someone who's not ready to receive the help, you could put them in more danger. Yeah. Like they might have a plan. Maybe they're preparing something. But if you try to come in like the superhero, it might derail that plan. So, you know, communicating, how can I help you? Is probably really important.
Yeah. And how are you staying safe? I think that's the number one question we want to know. Like, how are you staying safe? You know, because a lot of us, we have that instinct of leave that, like leave the situation. What are you doing? You deserve so much better. And, you know, they know that.
Easier said than done.
Yeah, and it's easier said than done. But they know that the person they're with is a monster. Yeah. Right? But the issue is that everything else that person has on them that we might not know about. You know? Yeah. So that's why I always say, you know, let's just try to figure out what we can do to be of support to them, and then we'll go from there.
Gotcha. All right. Well, thank you.
Of course.
Any last thoughts?
Let's see. Any last thoughts?
I'm good. Right. I feel like we need to do this again.
Yeah. So you did give me a list of resources, and I'm gonna attach them to the description of this video on YouTube. And there's a few different links that we can link to our website, right, Travis? We can do that. So yeah. Well, thank you so much.
Nice. Yeah, thank you guys. It was so nice being here with you.
It was really nice meeting you.
Yeah.
It's I love social media because we get to have moments like this. So I do end every episode asking my wife do you still like me? But since you're our guest,
Mm-hmm.
Do you still like us?
I do.
Okay, thank you so much.
No,
Thank
thank
you.
you guys.
All right,
Peace out.
bye.